Hello, I am a concerned young black boy, and I'm here to tell you about the school-to-prison pipeline. It is very dangerous for people like me because you will end up in handcuffs for doing minor things. And an organization that caught my eye was the Sunshine Education Coalition because these ladies try their best to do all they can to end the school-to-prison pipeline, and I know one day they will, and they are fantastic. And I hope you can show them support. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 28 Days of Black Brilliance. I cannot tell you how much gratitude I have for everyone that is here. This has definitely been something we've been planning for all year since the last one, and we are super excited. I am April Cobb, one of the founders of the Sunshine Education Coalition, and I share that platform with two wonderful ladies that have to put up with my craziness sometimes, but they truly know that it comes from the place of a heart where I'm passionate about this overall topic, which is our African American and Hispanic boys, and realistically changing the trajectory of them being funneled into the school to prison pipeline. Tonight, our moderator is going to be Dr. Angela Schroden, and we are super excited. Go ahead and take it over, Dr. Schroden.
Thank you, April. And as April said, I am also excited because anytime I get to spend time in the presence of, I'm going to include three, I'm going to include Lorena here, but I get to spend time with April and Denise on the regular. And as I have referred to them often, they are my friends and my mentors. And so I am most excited. While I am moderating tonight, I am also going to be doing some learning as well, as I hope the rest of the community will. And before we get started, I always like to put in a reminder about what the Sunshine Education Coalition is about and its purpose for existence. And so it is a grassroots organization started by my colleagues, April and Denise, to provide awareness of the school to prison pipeline, that it exists, and to most importantly, dismantle it. And so one of the things that we often talk about is it is easy to get lost in that the school to prison pipeline consists of two things, the schools and prisons. And it is an insidious web of many more things than that. And so what we hope to do tonight, while we are focused on this idea of cultivating genius and honoring Black brilliance that is present in all of our Black children that we serve, we also want to take a look at what are the things that are contributing to the school to prison pipeline, making it run much smoother than it needs to. But I do want to make sure that we stay centered on the idea that there are places and ways that we can center Black brilliance and bring it to the surface. And so while we are going to talk about some pieces that I guess I would refer to as the negative aspect, I don't want to lose sight of making sure that we center how do we make the change happen. So that's what I hope to do with the questions that we have tonight. But before I do that, I know I've said April and Denise's name a million times, but I also want to make sure very specifically that I introduce and remind everyone that April Cobb, in addition to being the founder of the Sunshine Education Coalition, is also an amazing middle school educator here, right? I probably should center that first, right? Because of what we do here. And Denise as well. So Denise, smile. When I give you your big smile, there you go, Denise, who is also the co-founder of Sunshine Education Coalition, as well, a middle school educator. And our newest addition, right, to the panel is Lorena Herman, who is, and I've got a long list. I don't know what you wanted me to say or not say. So I was introduced to Lorena through this amazing group of women that came together to do this thing called #DisruptText, and where they really were being very intentional about recognizing whose voices were being heard in the text that we are using in schools and whose voices were being ignored, and how we can make sure that the curriculum and the text that we have in our classrooms are really being representative of all of the students we serve, and how we can make sure that their voices and their thinking and their brilliance are also centered. I also have to say this is near and dear to my heart, for the National Council of English Teachers Committee Against Racism and Bias. And her amazing husband have also have an organization called Multicultural Classroom, where they just do the real work of exactly what their title is, Multicultural Classroom. So welcome to all of you. Welcome to all of you. And we are going to get started tonight with a very broad question, but it's always a place that last year and this year that we think it is important to begin. So I'll start with April. Why don't you start with your thoughts and beliefs about the School to Prison Pipeline?
Well, after all this intense work we've been doing for some time, it's interesting to say that it has shifted a lot. Not to put me on the scale of being in disbelief, but on the other side of the scale to say, why aren't more people shouting to the top of their lungs that there is something damn wrong with what's happening to our children in public education as it relates to discipline? Why do we not have more people taking being intentional or taking a special interest into what's happening? So my belief is that the School to Prison Pipeline, as it relates to the alignment from school to being funneled into DJJ and into the court system and then into youth camps and then in possibly prisons, is that it can be changed. It's just a matter of starting just like we did last year, being intentional about the research, the data, the conversations with the right people that have compassion and empathy and a care, a desire to want to do what's best for children. And unfortunately, we have not been so successful to a place to where we found enough people that are willing to take the time to do all of those things at a place to where we can see a true change, not 5-year plan change. And y'all know where I'm going with that. But we need something to happen now. And yes, we know it won't be overnight, but if we take small bits of it and aggressively attack those areas, we will see some shift. Right now, we're at the same place, if not, in my opinion, worse than we were last year, because now we got other traits that are becoming more relevant because of the fact that we know of all the trauma, of all the, various traits that are, already have that are aligned with the School to Prison Pipeline. But again, like Denise always say, parents do not write referrals. Aunties, uncles, and grandmas do not tell the child to stay home because they did not demonstrate what was expected to be considered appropriate school behavior. And even if they did, they will also have a conversation with them. We will hope to say what you did wrong, corrective measures, and what to do differently in order to get a different results. And that's what I believe. I could go on and on about this. That's my passion. So I just think that we got to do something different, and we're going to keep talking about it. I'm going to talk about it until I see true change. And at this point, I just don't see it. And it's not a state of Florida. It's not a Hillsborough County thing. This is a nationwide thing. So I think versus taking offense, some individuals, that we're attacking the district. No, we're attacking the problem. Don't take it personal. We're attacking the issue that is impacting Black and brown children at such an alarming rate that I don't know how some people sleep at night.
Denise or Lorena, would you like to add to April's thinking? When you hear that phrase, School to Prison Pipeline, and it always makes me nervous when something flows off the tongue that easily that it becomes, it's just a thing we say like any other thing we say in education, without really stopping to think, when you put School to Prison Pipeline, those 4 words together, what that genuinely means for real human beings, for real children. Hey, yeah.
Okay, am I muted? Okay.
There you go.
Hey, thought process is just like what April was saying. One of the big things is trauma, bias, and just the lack of caring. So if you're seeing the numbers, well, of course, it's public information. This is information that we are not hiding. This information is right there. If you just know where to look, you can just go right on Florida DOE and see it right there. We see the numbers are high. And so the big thing is truly about caring, about having the heart to say, you know what, this is happening to one particular group more than everybody else. And why is this happening? And just stopping and saying, how did it take, how long did it take to get to this point? And why are we not doing something to be very proactive about it? So that's, it is a real thing. And then one thing that we've come across over the years of just discussing this with a variety of people is noting that people are just trying to say to us that this does not exist, but this is a nationwide problem. You're seeing this everywhere. The numbers don't lie. Even if you're saying, oh, well, it decreased just by like 1%, but it's still there. It's still, the gap is huge. So it's just a matter of really just saying, are we being completely intentional when we look at the data, look at who's writing referrals, look at the system, and then saying to ourselves, where's the supports and the help? Because this would be, we could slow it down, we could bring it to a halt, we could stop it if we had the support, if we had the help. So that's what, that's how I feel personally about it, that it's here, it's real, but we need continuous support towards it, and funding. They support too.
Yeah, I mean, I think to answer one of your questions, Denise, is this intentional? And the answer is yes, this is intentional, because this isn't the first year of these numbers. We've seen this for many, many years. And the patterns have been researched and studied. There are numerous TED Talks on this. Okay, there are books on this. There have been panels and workshops and conferences. So it's not like folks in education don't know about this phenomenon of the school to prison pipeline. It's that people in leadership positions don't care. And that's a very harsh thing to say. But like, if I know that you, Denise, are sitting somewhere and you're suffering, right? Like there's ants biting your feet, I don't know. And I'm sitting here like, oh, that's just so sad. But I have ant poison in my hand, then clearly I don't care, right? I don't love you. I don't care about your health. I am not concerned. It doesn't matter to me. And so that's what we have on our hands. And I think that is overwhelming, that reality. Because what it communicates is that we're going to have to fend for ourselves. And we have yet to be able to really do that effectively, right? Because of a million different reasons, right? Because we have, not only does this school to prison pipeline need to be fixed, but the prisons themselves need to be fixed. The schools need to be fixed. And so it's like, where do we even begin? And there are places to begin, because again, like, we're not having a conversation that other people aren't having either, right? Like there's a lot of people talking. So there are solutions, and what is needed is for the people who are in power to let go of their benefits from this system and value lives over profit, because it comes down to money.
Lorena, that leads me into this next question that's, again, very broad, and it's a two-part, right? So asking the panel, and your conversation about money, right, is making me think about this definition of what does it mean for kids to attend a good school, right? I mean, I can tell you what I think people mean when they say a good school, and that is often a white school that makes, according to test scores, certain test scores. That is what a good school. All other things, who cares about anything else? Those two things make it a good school. So, and the reason why I go to money is it is also no surprise, decades of research, that tight correlation between high SES and good test scores, right? So thinking about that idea of money, and that how much money it does take to truly support students when they have needs, right? So I want to like talk about this idea of really what makes a good school. And is the definition of a good school the same for every child, every family? Right? Because that is I feel like the continuous drumbeat in our ears, educators, is creating good schools for everybody, but we don't really know if we think that or want that. Or I'm going to put the money towards it. So I'm going to stop talking now and let y'all address that. So what is the definition of a good school, and is a good school the same for every child?
I mean, yeah, I can start. So you're right that unfortunately a good school is determined by test scores, right? Because now they even have grades, an A+ school or whatever school. And I think that that is a shame, because what we're doing is that we're saying that these schools that have the better funding and better resources are better schools regardless of how they treat children. Regardless of how they treat children. Oh, but the test scores. Meanwhile, they are over disciplining Black boys. They are suspending Black girls. They are not allowing Latinx students to speak Spanish or learn in their home languages, right? They have erased Indigenous identity, and they're racially biased toward Asian students, for example. But this is an A+ school because they're test scores. And so we have schools in the Tampa area, and I live by one that I will not name. And I was talking to a friend of mine, a Black mom who goes to, I don't want to name these places because the point is not the places. So her daughter goes to a school that's a public school, and she is not too content with her experience there. And she's like, I want to put her in that private school. And I said, ma'am, that school don't want your daughter, and they don't want you. They may be a good school, but they're a good school for their people, for the people who participate and subscribe to and sustain that culture and all those ways of being. Your daughter will not succeed there. I'm not saying that your current school is the right one either, but don't think that because there's these fancy cars showing up over there, that somehow that school is going to be conducive to your daughter's learning and that she's going to come out of there whole, because she's not. We know that. So, this conversation about what makes a school a good one is a very important one. And I think that it's especially important for Black and brown parents, because in our search for a good education for our kids, we have to look at the definition of good very differently. We made a choice that other people will have looked down on us for, because we chose a school that is qualified as Title I. But guess what? My daughter ain't the only brown girl in that room. My daughter's teacher is therefore intentional about what books she places in that curriculum, right? There are accommodations made that my daughter necessarily doesn't need, economically speaking, but yeah, we could use the support too, right? And in that sense, we get to bring our expertise as educators. My husband and I are both educators, so we get to bring our support to that school as well. And my daughter gets to hear Spanish spoken during recess. She gets to see other moms that look as disheveled as I do, right? She can have a fro today because she's not alone. We get her hair done, it looks like other people's hair. And so that to me matters, because she's coming out whole. And there, I have some issues, but that's, I'm keeping it together, and they're minor, because there is no perfect context. And so if I have to pick and choose, we're going to that school. We use school choice for that. And we pulled her out of what she was zoned in, because I caught all the wrong vibes the first day I went. I said, not here, sir. Not to this one. And it's like, well, this one's Title I. That doesn't mean anything to me, because I know what it means to you. And so I think that as Black and brown parents, we have to shift what it is we've been told is good to really make sense of what it is that our kids need, because that is not it. That's not it. Our kids are getting torn. They're getting beat up in these schools, metaphorically and physically speaking at times, right? And morally speaking, there is spirit murdering happening, like Bettina Love talks about in her book. And so we have to be thoughtful and careful and not listen to what the larger status quo is telling us is the quote unquote good school.
And it's interesting that you made reference to spirit murdering. That right there just was like a gut punch to hear that, spoken aloud, because I have, to not name schools, let me try to get my thoughts together so I don't say names of schools. Let me just say that I had a relative that had a child at one of the most prestigious, and here in the Tampa Bay area, they consider a very prestigious private school. And, it becomes wearing on the mind for you to be the only Black boy in the room, or the only Black boy, to represent you as a person. And it became a point, like when sports were over, you're right, they no longer wanted him. When the football season was done, they no longer wanted him. So everything he did became a problem. Chewing gum became a problem. dropping a pencil and not moving quick enough to pick it up became a problem. Your pants on your uniforms, the belt is just not holding them up high enough. That's a problem. And when we seen that he did not generate what could be future revenue and recognition for that school at a later time, he was no longer good enough. But now he's over at the public school, intentional about which school to send him to. And he is thriving to a place to where everything seems to be coming easy to him. Like, it can't be this easy. Yes, it is, because you see people that look like you. That environment is cultivating your genius, because it's not only doing what needs to be done, it's going above and beyond to meet you spiritually. It don't have to be religion to be spiritual. And it's meeting you to a place to where identity and so on and so forth. So that right there was good. Like, I almost did a shout in the seat, Denise.
I absolutely agree. Good school. The thing about it is the product is what you're looking at, the product. Okay. So the product is the child. Is the child coming out of the school feeling whole? So I'm going to take what both of you ladies said and put it together. Does the child come out of the school feeling like, okay, all of my needs were met? Yes, educationally, but especially socially and emotionally. I'm going to school and I'm not feeling like I have just been singled out. I have been, that statement right there, soul murdered. I'm happy when I went to school, as I'm going to school. So good should not be based upon test scores, or to say, okay, yes, this is the good school because everybody here has a test score. Well, if you look at colleges nowadays, I mean, you have some colleges where everybody who walks in the door is at a 4.0. Okay, now, so what's the difference? What's the thing that makes that child special? It's all about whether or not this child now can go in, feel comfortable, feel welcome, feel embraced, feel safe. That's a big thing right now, especially with the high level of trauma that's going on, that child feeling safe in their environment. And then when they get back home, that they can just bring that to home, and the parents can discuss that with them and they still feel okay. So that's to me the definition of a good school, what the child gets out of it and what is produced once the child goes through that school.
Angela, can I add something again? Because I want to be very tangible with the answer too, because I went off and I got mad. But I want to offer some specific things too, because this is important. And I know that there are parents who are making choices, right? Like when I walk in, what am I looking for? And so here are some things that I look for when I'm with my kids and I'm visiting a school. Immediately, I want to know who the principal is. Is this a principal who's a person of color? And if not, then does this principal understand the issues that pertain to my children, right? Like, is this an educator who is understanding of anti-racist education and principles? Now, the list I'm giving, like if you can find a school to check all of that off, please email Angela ASAP because I want to go there, okay? But this list is not necessarily like, oh, you know what, it's only 2, I'm crossing it off. I mean, maybe, right? Like, you as a parent, you have to determine with this criteria if it works for you or not. But anyway, I look for principals. I want to know how diverse is the teaching force at this school? How many teachers of color do you have? How many Black male teachers do you have, which are like unicorns in public schools that are not doing PE or disciplinary roles? So I want to know who are these teachers. Next, I want to know how diverse is the student population. Typically, if it's a public school, then we're just looking at the community, right? Like the community demographics determine that. Next, I want to know what's some of the curriculum that is being taught here. Is there curriculum that teaches true history? Count me in. If this is a curriculum where they're intentional about what kinds of books they're putting in front of my children to expose them to all types of diversity, then count me in. Is this going to be a curriculum where there's a lot of testing? Every other week, every month, there's a lot of testing? Count me out. All that testing is not developmentally appropriate. So I don't want it, especially in elementary schools, right? I want to know, what are your disciplinary systems? Are kids getting sent home and suspended for little infractions, for little things that they do for their belt? Or like in some of these other charter schools, like, oh, you don't have the right shoes on, so they call you and you got to leave your job to come get your kid. I'm not doing that. You call me when there's a real problem and let me know if someone has done something wrong to my child, and et cetera, right? So like, what are your disciplinary systems for dealing with conflict in schools? Do you have a protocol for race-based conflicts. A lot of schools don't. A lot of schools don't. So they know how to handle when somebody is quote unquote bullying another, but they don't necessarily have procedures or protocols to deal with race-based interactions. And even if they don't have them, then I, as a parent, see that as an opportunity. Like, okay, you might not have them, but let's have that conversation because you can be sure it's happening and you want your teachers to be equipped to deal with it. But those are the types of things that I'm looking for. And that to me is what makes a good school. I don't care what your test scores are. I don't care about your free and reduced lunch numbers. I don't care that you're using a Title I title. None of that really matters to me because that just means money. You can have all the money in the world and mistreat my child. So what I want to know is, who is the principal? Who are these teachers? Who are the kids that are going to be in class with my daughter? And how is the teacher prepared and equipped to manage all of that learning?
You know, Lorena, and I'm responding to Lorena, but I want Denise and April involved in this piece as well. You know, my hope with this, and I know Denise and April's as well, is that this panel and this conversation reaches the masses. And so, you know, trying to operate in good faith and trying to believe that people that are listening really do want to take action, and recognizing that when you are entrenched in a system, and there are a few things more entrenched than the public education system and how it operates in this country. So thinking about actualizing, you know, I'm thinking about the pieces that Lorena rattled off, and had a very, like, she knew what are ways that schools, how do you capture that? Like, I think that's where I'm headed with it. So how does an administrator, how does a district capture that idea? And I'm thinking about, say, our local district, which has, at my level, 155 elementary schools. How do you capture what the community, because that's what our schools are supposed to be, reflective of the community and serving the community in which they are. How do we capture that to begin to actualize and move out of the entrenched system?
I think it's almost impossible to capture that at such a large, like, our district is just too large. I think that districts have more success when they kind of chunk them out, make them smaller. Like, I didn't even realize that that was a thing until hearing other people from other states or even other counties say, "Oh, our district is." How do y'all even manage? How does a superintendent or leadership even knows who someone is when it's so large like that? But we can make anything happen if we want to, though. We can make adjustments if we want to. So I know for me, when it comes to leadership at the school site, what does that look like? Like Lorena said, that administrator, regardless of their color, what is their true understanding of the demographics of the students and the culture of the students that are coming to the school? And what are they going to do to be intentional about making sure that those students feel as though the color don't even matter, to a place to where they feel love, welcome, that equates to you deserve to be here. We want you here. And those that's an easy task, in my opinion. But it would take for that leader to be keyword, and I'm gonna use it to like that, like our buzzword in the district at one point was robust. Well, this year my buzzword is intentional. If they are intentional about taking the time, get in your car, drive over in the hood where your kids are coming from, then you will see and understand some of their story. You can't even imagine the trauma, but you'll be able to understand some of their story. You can't keep getting in your car, driving back off in the suburbs and saying, those parents just don't care. How do you know? You never even walked a day, a step in their life. How do you know? So intentional. That's my thing. If we're going to start somewhere with leadership, site-based.
Me jumping on there, I would also say intentional for leadership, but also intentional hiring practices. I mean, in order for you to to truly have the staff that you need, that is welcoming and warm to the students and understands that you have to have people who are really, when you bring them in the door, do you understand our population? Are you aware of what the population needs? Have you been in these neighborhoods? I mean, just draw out those additional questions that you would have when you are in the process of hiring. Because too many times we see people come in and it's like, did you really think that person was the right fit for this school? I mean, did you ask them those appropriate questions? And so that really matters, because in the long run, this is somebody that's going to be in front of that child for over 189 days. So you need to know that this person is able to make a connection. And that is super important, because children will not learn from people that they can't connect to. So that right there, above and beyond everything else, I believe is a major part of it, which is who you're hiring. And then and it'll start from the top all the way down trickle down into the classroom, to every aspect of that school. So that's for me really what matters, what really matters the most as well.
Angela, can you help me? Can you restate the question? Because they said so many things and I want to talk about all the things, but I'd rather answer your question.
I was like, in my head, that was my follow-up question. I was like, yes, I think I can restate it. It was thinking about, because, my hope is that people, educators, are listening and that they are hearing and really do want to take action. Yeah. So I was thinking about, your very specific list and but you are possibly unique.
Yeah, possibly, sure.
Right, possibly sure. Unique, and you have, this set of criteria that is non-negotiable for you. How can we hear those? How can we capture that so we can create those schools that are serving and supporting the community? And I say we as administrators, how can school systems capture that to move more towards that, as opposed to this is the system and this is how we operate?
Yeah, I mean, that's the work. That is the work at schools. It's okay. How do we address this? How do we address that? Right? Having the areas that you want to intentionally address and work on. And then I think communicating that is very important. So I think leadership in schools, I'm being very general. Obviously, there's exceptions to the rule always. But I think generally speaking, a lot of school leaders don't necessarily communicate some of this stuff that I've articulated to parents and community members, right? Because they think, oh, well, they want to know test scores. They want to know about the dance, right? All the logistics and the day-to-day information that parents need, which is true. They do want that. But I think that there are also ways to say, hey, we've been training our teachers to do this. We brought in more diverse books about that. We have been doing this kind of work, right? So this type of equity focused or anti-bias and anti-racist education, whatever phrasing they want to use, because we know that a lot of these terms are not politicized. So whatever language they want to use, they can use. But I think that there are ways and spaces to communicate that. I know as a parent, I would value that so much. That doesn't happen right now for me, right? So right now, the administrator does not communicate with me. And I don't know if it's because she's concerned about parents in the community. I don't know. It's because they're not doing it at all. I don't know. And that silence around that topic is one problem, because then I also can't hold her accountable, right? I can't hold the teachers accountable because I don't know what's going on. And I also don't know if I don't have to hold anybody accountable. I could easily be like, oh, they got it. I'm chilling with my feet up. I could be fine about this, but I don't know, And so I think that finding ways, whether it's, newsletters like we get all the time from Hillsborough County, or we get, you walk into the hallway and there's a nice little bulletin board dedicated to that so that parents know, flyers that come home from teachers, in the same ways that we get notes about when iReady is going to happen and when the hockey team is coming to give us a hockey stick. They can communicate, right? Y'all are laughing, but it's true. We have a system of communication.
Right. We are laughing because, yes, things do happen quite often.
Right? But they're picking and choosing what it is they communicate. And this other stuff is very important and necessary, but they're not communicating about that, Now, I understand that it's politicized, but no one can argue against words like unity. So pick your words, be strategic, but communicate what you need to communicate so that I know that you're at least addressing something, but let's not act right? Anyway. So I think that there are ways for this work to continue and or to start in schools, and for it to be communicated effectively to parents, because that builds community. Because then I, as a parent, know what you're doing. I can probably practice a little bit of trust, right? And get involved and feel more confident.
Those are great nuggets. Go ahead.
I know. I was just sitting there thinking, like, so smart, right? Like, I'm over here taking notes. Like, oh, that's right. I'm also kidding.
Especially when it comes to Hillsburg, come to PTA. Those were great advocacy tools right there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the question would become, not question, the statement is now, trying to tread lightly in with this information, because everybody's walking on eggshells about something that isn't a thing. It's not a thing. When it comes to critical race, it's not a thing. In classroom, it's not a thing. It never has been. So it's just like, do you say this? Do you write this? But I get where you're going.
Right. And April, if we're being honest, like, that has only been recently. So one could begs the question, what was preventing you before now? Right? Like I can get it if you're a little nervous now, but that's only been now. And what's preventing you? So we do have a question that was on Facebook Live. And Ellen, I promise I'm going to get to that. There was a line of thinking that I wanted to stick with for just a few minutes. And then I want to come back to that. Lorena touched on it a little bit about the testing piece and how do we manage that. But so along those lines, and my question started with the word deficit thinking, but if I'm going to be honest, the deficit thinking and perspectives that are often present in schools that serve Black students, especially if the majority of the staff looks like me and is white, like, if we're honest, it's not just deficit thinking, right? Like, there's some racist thinking, there's some bias thinking. Like, we're not just going to stop at deficit. I think that makes it a little too just be kind, and we're going to we're going to save the world. So, but it is pervasive, and it's like the language often that we hear says the right things. We believe in our kids. Our scholars, like, we try and do all the things, and yet the actions, and Ellen in her question, the use of over testing is prevalent. Like, if we just keep testing them, somehow the test is going to make them smarter, versus let me change the way I think about what's happening here. And, that has plagued me for a really long time working in education, that the more students of color, the poor, and you add, if they also happen to be experiencing poverty, the curriculum is so narrowed to almost, it's just a test prep. I just show up every day and we're going to test prep, and somehow we're going to make that better. So I know what it is, but for the good of the audience, what is the impact of that? Because I genuinely believe there are people that believe that is it. That is what they need. If they just get more, because then their test scores are going to be better, and then they're going to have more opportunity. So, and I am open. If I'm wrong in my thinking that they deserve more, like, I'm ready to hear it. But, I want y'all to speak a little bit to the impact of that deficit thinking that narrows the curriculum so much. But more importantly, how do we change that thinking?
The tests, the mini tests. Let me just say this. Every time I think about all of the tests, it just sickens me to a place to try to figure out how to best prepare my students for these tests. And guess what that leads to? More tests. Because I have to expose them to the types of questions that are going to be put in front of them. And then I have to build their foundation to a place that they're prepared for the test. But then I got these people on my back saying, you're not doing this, and the state saying, you can't do that, and you should have did this, and you ought to do that. But You've been saying that for years. And if what you have been saying holds truth or value, why we don't see a change? Why aren't we seeing the gap close at such a rate for our minority children that are coming out of poverty-driven communities? Why don't we see a change? I'm sick of the 2 and 3%. I'm sick of it. I'm just saying. And then for it to be so much pressure on the teachers. Everybody don't have tough skin like I do. Everybody is not as vocal as I am. And everybody will not say, I'm going to do what's best for my students. But then those same students, their learning deficits are so great to where we are doing them a disservice by constantly just force feeding these tests. Yes, I don't think there's not one educator on this earth that says, I don't want to know how my students are progressing or the lack thereof. There's no teacher that does that. I don't know of one. Even the worst teacher I think we could find in America, there's not one that says, I don't want to know how they're doing. I'm just going to just do. No, nobody does that. But in the end, based upon the constant testing, what are we doing to these children that are already struggling? Is it beneficial for them? Absolutely not. Is it creating more trauma? Yes, it is.
I absolutely agree. Trauma, stress, because I mean, you can see the children like when they know the test is coming. Like right now, they get the FSA rights and all these things that are coming up, and it's like, okay, I'm stressed out. I don't know how I'm gonna do. I'm gonna fail. They're already talking themselves into an unsuccessful frame of mind, and it's because of the over testing. And April hit the nail on the head when it comes to the deficits. I mean, we're in middle school, so we're already seeing them come in from elementary school with this humongous gap, and this is pre-COVID. So they're coming in there just grade levels behind, unable to write, unable to take pieces of text and put them together and make coherent paragraphs and be able to decode information and figure out vocabulary, complex sentences. I mean, it's just, and then you say you got to test them, but they're lacking the basics. They're lacking the foundation. So how are you testing people who are having a problem even decoding what the instructions are in order to answer the question? So that right there it's unnecessary. It just, let's go all the way back to the foundational skills that the kids need, so they need that stepping stone. Just like when you're building a house, they need a foundation. They need that, and then continue from there, because constantly testing them, it's like 20, 30 years of testing. How many different standards we've been to? Sunshine State and this one, and now we have Best that's coming up. I mean, what is it going to do other than continue to stress the teacher? And this is the reason why teachers are leaving in droves, because you're already telling us what we can and cannot teach. Then you're telling us, oh, we're not doing a good job, even though we have been in here in the trenches for years, struggling through. But it's still not good enough. But yet you're not providing resources. We could go on, but let me just pause right there, because stop telling me it's not good enough. But you're still not. But you're withdrawing all the help that I need in order to make myself successful and my students successful. But I'm gonna put a pin in it right there. Okay.
There's so much to say, y'all. Testing is one of my soapboxes. Standardized testing. Let me say a couple things. One, there's a difference between standardized testing and assessment. There's a difference. So I can assess, which to April's point, I can assess how a student is doing multiple ways, because people, human beings, show their learning and their mastery of subjects and their understanding in a multitude of ways. And so if a teacher has the flexibility to do that, then I can tell you much more than what that student shows me through choice and guessing on multiple choice pieces of paper, which I won't even get into the statistics of how many students actually do that, right? Because there's a lot of research showing the ways that multiple choice testing is really about just understanding patterns, mathematical patterns, and guessing correctly. So we don't even know what it is that we're assessing with these tests, okay? The other thing that is important to understand is that for too long, we've been having a conversation about young people being disengaged. Oh, they're bored at school. They don't like school. They're checked out. They're in the back with a hoodie. I agree that those are the behaviors they're displaying, My problem is in localizing the problem in the student. The curriculum is disengaged. That curriculum is not connected to their community, to themselves, and to the real world. If we are still teaching the same books from 1945 or 1965, if we're still teaching a science for 1950 and 1970, why should that student sit there and say, oh yeah, this is going to be useful and relevant for me in 2024? We are the fools, not them. We're the fools. We the adults, I don't mean the teachers, right? Like we the adults are the fools who think that this is the curriculum that they need for a world that literally doesn't exist anymore. So that's another thought. And then thirdly, the problem with standardized testing too, and this is just a longer conversation, but there's a lot of articles out there that you can find too that to kind of help you for the people asking these questions and wanting to understand more. Like standardized testing actually stems from early, I'm going to try to use like non-research language just because it's easier even for me to understand. But essentially, back in the day, forever ago, a lot of testing was designed to determine who was smarter and who was not by using eugenics, right? Like biologically, this group is smarter than another. And we know which group they were trying to prove is smarter than other groups. And so these tests continue in the spirit of that same type of testing and structure. So when these tests continue to simply show that kids of color are not like white kids, that's all they're doing. Or that poor kids are not as whatever as wealthier kids. So when you're telling me that a math question, for example, says, you know, in the backyard, Jimmy got a pool that is 7 feet whatever deep and 17 feet wide, tell me the circumference. Jose, who does not have a pool in his backyard, does not have the same advantage as Caleb, who has that pool, because he has seen them clean the pool and he has an idea.
You
so
better
what you are
say
assessing,
it.
April, what you are assessing there is culture, access, and wealth. You're not assessing mathematical skills. So that's part of the problem, is that these tests inherently in their design, in the way that they ask questions, are biased. So we are not actually assessing any cognitive skills. Let me tell you what is an actual useful assessment: a portfolio. So this is not, teachers aren't like, no testing. And then we're like, we don't know what to do. Because this standardized testing as it is used now started in the 2000s in public schools. Like, this isn't what we've been doing forever. None of us in this panel and many of the people here in this chat, if they're parents, we didn't grow up with this. And it seems like we're okay, right? And so anyway, the portfolios offer, and this is not a campaign for portfolios. I don't have any investment in portfolios or whatever. I'm just trying to give an example.
They used to do them big time.
They used to do them.
And they're still supposed to be doing them for third grade, but I'm going to leave that alone.
Oh, okay. Well, what I'm trying to say is that we wouldn't necessarily be like, well, what are we going to do now? There is nothing else. No, like, that's just one example, right? Teachers are innovative. We are creative. That's part of what it is to design curriculum, is to say, I want you to learn this thing. Let me figure out how to get you there. We can do that with assessment. And so portfolios, for example, allow a kid to say, I understand this idea. Let me show you how I understand it in 5 ways. That's so much more meaningful than me filling out 5 bubbles of using language that you have written down. I didn't even write the test as a student. That's even more useful. Have a kid write a test. That's one way to show you learn something. So the problem, there's so many problems with standardized testing. They lack creativity. They are biased. And then it's harmful and spirit murdering, because now you have kids, and I saw this in the flesh. I had kids in my class in Massachusetts who had arrived less than a year ago, sitting there for standardized testing using language they did not have yet. And so that is literally illegal. But yet here we are because of funding. And that's why it happens, because it's tied to funding. And someone asked, like, can we avoid testing in public schools? You can opt your kids out. A lot of principals don't want to communicate that because it's tied to funding. And I understand that. I'm sensitive to the principals that are really hustling in their schools and trying to use the funding appropriately. But as a parent, your concern is your child, not that school. That's the truth. And if you know that this is causing problems for your child, then you do what you need for your child. I know that during standardized testing, the weeks, and it was weeks, it was really more, but let me just say weeks, the different weeks throughout the year, because then there's the retest, and then there's the practice test, and then there's the makeup test. So during those weeks of standardized testing, we had more calls to the nurse and more 911 calls and more fights and behavioral incidents than any other periods of time throughout the school year. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with, to April's point, or Denise, now I can't remember, if these tests were doing what they were supposed to be doing, we would not have students underperforming in college. Because if this is about college readiness, then they're supposed to be ready. But we're at a point where Latino students are dropping out of colleges. So when the problem continues to be that particular students are not doing well, instead of looking at the students, we have to say, what is wrong with this system?
Absolutely. I want to jump in and say this, that back at, like, on the panel, looking at the age representation on the panel, okay, many of us could finish college in 3.5 to 4 years. Now you need to add in that extra year because everybody is being remediated during that first year. They haven't learned anything. Why are you taking additional math? You're taking a writing class. You're taking all this stuff all over again, as if to say you never even went through 4 years of high school. So I absolutely agree with that point as well.
Oh, go ahead, April.
And to your point, to say that some parents are even being told that if your child don't take the standardized test, then they won't be capable of gaining access to certain classes. I tell you this, parents, we have to be more proactive,
intentional,
in having those conversations to say, and intentional, to have those conversations to say, show me and put that in writing for me. Put it in writing, because I need to call and figure out.
And sign your name on it. And sign your name on it.
Yes. Because that's not true. That's not true. And it's sometimes challenging to advocate in an arena that you are not familiar with. But one thing most parents are very familiar with is being a parent and how to advocate. Maybe not to the level they think they are capable of, but you can do it. Don't tell them that your child cannot be in specific classes because they didn't take a standardized test. I have not seen that in Florida statutes. Have anybody of y'all seen that?
See, it's the action. I love when we get to the action part, right? Like, how can people take action? So I'm gonna, this next part is, I have to read something. I don't usually like to read when I'm talking to y'all, but I want to be able to capture and not mess up these words. So, one of my favorite people to learn from, and my new favorite mode of writing is the Twitter thread. Like, if you can do a Twitter thread right, it is like a whole dissertation packed into about 280, it's not words, what is it? 280
characters.
Thank you. And some pictures. So Michael Harriot's one of my favorite ones, right? Like, you can learn a lot. But Nicole Hannah-Jones is also one. And so I want to read something that she has said often, and then it will lead into our question. I think we're kind of on this avenue. And she talks about, if you study history, that you'll understand our schools are indeed not broken, that they are actually operating exactly as they were designed, referring to historically inferior schools for Black children. And then she goes on to say that the work ahead is not going to be about small fixes and little patches and a little bit of equity or unity here, a little bit of sprinkling in some bias training. She doesn't say that. That's me adding to her words. And then she goes on to say it is going to have to require an undoing of the entire way that we structure education and equality. So we have talked a lot even here tonight, and April and Denise and I talk often about the structural barriers to creating equitable experiences. So there's two parts where I'm headed. If you want to talk about an additional structural barrier that we haven't discussed here, but what would you propose to undo and restructure the educational experience for our Black children? Because y'all have captured so much of the experience of so many of our Black students. So how do we redo that? Because it isn't about the 2 to 3%, right? We want to, in the case of Sunshine Education Coalition, dismantle it and let's start all over again. Let's start from a clean slate and have them in mind. So anyone who would like to go first with that question?
That's one of those ones I need to think a little bit. That's thought provoking. That's a good question. We all sitting here like,
Angela, I want you to give it to me in bullet points.
I know. I'm so sorry. I'm so narrative focused. So probably the real question is, what do you see as a structural barrier to creating equitable experiences for Black students?
Okay.
And then what is a solution you would propose?
Okay. The barrier is racism. And what do I propose? Yeah, that's all of it. That's the work. It's all the change.
Yeah. And I would say, and I was like, I was trying to do that without sound, right? And there you go, right? There's
Right.
the answer. So, and then thinking about, we're going to get into the Don't Make Me Feel Uncomfortable bill before we get off of the call, right?
Yeah.
Senate bill, I think it's like 148. But so, yes.
Yeah.
So then I think, how do you have the conversations? And, Lorena, April, and Denise, like, this is kind of your life's work. How do you continue to have conversations? It's one thing when you got people coming to a panel because they want to hear it.
Right.
Right. It's another thing when you have people actively pushing against you, being outright, going to a school board meeting, all of the things that are happening. How do we continue to move that? How do we continue to change it in spite of it all?
Yeah, it's really, those are different questions, but the question about what is the change that is needed, that has been articulated in so many ways for so many years by different researchers and educators who have come up with solutions, right? And so I think it's less about how do we do it and getting and more about getting the commitment of the people in power to say, let's do it. Because then we can come up with answers. It's like reparations for African Americans, right? Like, oh, you want to do it via check or Cash App or Venmo? Bruh, just let's make a decision. And we will find, you want to give it out in checks and you want to give it out in pennies, people will show up. The problem is not the how, it is the willingness. Are we really going to deal with racism? Let me give you an example, right? So like in March, in the summer of 2020, we had the Great White Racial Awakening, where a whole bunch of white folks were like, oh my goodness, this is really happening. I want to do something about it. Where are we today? And there was a report by NPR, I don't know if y'all seen this, where support for Black Lives Matter decreased since that summer. So the more that these white folks learned, the less they actually wanted to do something about it. So no, we're not really going to solve all of these problems. So it continues to fall on us and our co-conspirators like you and others, Angela, who are like, yeah, I've been about it, I'm gonna be about it, so we're just gonna keep hustling and working, because that's always what it's been. You know what I mean? And so then it turns, then we can get to your question of like, what do we do in the face of all of this legislation? We've been here before. We've been here before in other ways, right? Like at one point it was illegal for African Americans to read and write. Did they stop? No. It was illegal for Latinos in the Southwest to speak Spanish. Did they stop? No. It was illegal for Indigenous people to exist. Did they stop? No. So we continue and we press on and we always come on the other side of it, scarred, but we on the other side, and we continue. And our generations speak for themselves, right? Because they're here and they're thriving in the midst of it all in a system that is hell-bent on them not thriving. So I know that doesn't sound, that's not the most hopeful way to express that, but this is part of it. In this fight, in this struggle is where our hope and our strength lies, because it's a collective effort. We know we're not alone. We know we got people with us. I see other, here in Florida, I can't always turn to the Latinos and give them the nod because I'm not sure. And that's just our internal problem. I'm trying to deal with it, y'all. I'm sorry. But I know that most of the time when I see Black folks, I'm like, taking a deep breath, a collective deep breath with you, we proceed, right? And so that community is where the sustenance is. And this is how we keep going. And we look at the legislation, we fight back as we can, we support the organizations that are fighting back, but there's work to do everywhere, because that legislation isn't like somebody sitting in a corner doing something. That's an effort of people who are uneducated. And so there is work for educators to do.
Oh, that right there. Those words right there. There is work for the educators to do. We cannot continue to be in these classrooms on these school campuses and be like, I can't say anything because this may happen to me. And I speak from a position of talking about African American and Hispanic people. I say that for them, for us, because if our ancestors had done that, if they even just turned the eyes a little bit further away from all of the massive murders and the hangings that they saw, and they just said, you know what, I'm too afraid, I can't do it, we would not be coexisting right now on this virtual platform. So we have to stop saying it. We have to stop taking it to a place to say it doesn't impact me, so I'm not going to say anything, or I'm fearful of what you call it,
retaliation.
Retaliation. My life is built around retaliation. My folks, look, we born, my ancestors, my family is from Alabama, deep up the street, around the corner from Mississippi. Listen, whatever they didn't kill spiritually there, they surely not gonna kill it in me. You're not gonna kill it in me. You won't spirit murder me, not in this lifetime. And so these children that are among me and my family, I teach them to speak in boldness, but I also teach you to speak in respect. But that means that also when you're doing so, make sure you're knowledgeable about what you're speaking to. And that's where the breakdown comes. For those of us that are not screaming to, like I said, at the hilltop saying, school to prison pipeline is real. Our children cannot be cultivated in an environment to where you have something that's already in place that is constantly beating them down. They don't have a chance. So I guess one of the barriers for me would be is, jumping to a different topic, is lose the school grades. Lose them. Because these children understand when they say, oh, I go to a transformational school, I go to a Title I school, versus saying I go to a IB school, a magnet school, a A school. How do those children feel at those schools that's not seen as being accepted in a positive light? Lose it. Lose it. And how does it even make some of us teachers feel? Because I bust my every day. Probably much more so in a school that have children that...
Listen, I absolutely agree. The whole thing is about resilience, okay? To piggyback what April said, we are a resilient people. We came through so much. So therefore, if we're still here today, have no fear. Continue to speak up and speak out. Continue to say, hey, this doesn't seem right. This doesn't. If you're in your faculty meeting, your team meeting, whatever, especially teachers, because you're in the classroom with the kids. If you're in those meetings, say what it doesn't work. This curriculum is bad. This has no connection to my students. Let me pick my own books. As long as I'm following the standards, okay, that's what matters the most. Let me do what's best for my students, because I'm the one sitting in front of them every single day. And then know that someone has to speak out for them. You can't sit there and just say accept everything that you see or accept everything you hear. Okay, well, this is fine. This is the best I could do. No, we have to come out of the box and say to ourselves, this is what we need to do for our students. Our students come first. You got to put them first, and put first in terms of how they feel emotionally and whether or not they're going to feel successful. And then that whole piece that you said earlier about assessing them. They're kids who will lose their mind when they have to take a standardized test, but they can tell you everything about the material in front of them. They can paint it, they can draw it, they can do a rap, they can write a poem. They're kids who are amazing how they present the information. I know they got it, but it's just not the way that you think that this is how they should have it. Throw away the whole. So what they say? Throw the whole thing away. Throw the whole system away and start over. Throw the whole thing away. Start over with what's best for the children. We grew up with well-rounded I felt that I was well-rounded. We had everything, including home ec and all that stuff like that, wood shop, whatever, sewing class, all that stuff. We were well-rounded. We had art, music, and we came out okay. We came out highly creative, I believe. We were more critical thinkers. This is what needs to happen with this generation here. That's what I feel. This is what needs to happen with the school system. This from top down, and we need to have people who are much more open-minded as to the needs of all students, not just one particular set of students.
And if I could add one more thing, our focus in education is always meet the students where they're at, right? How does our standardized test do that? When we say that you can teach it to them in different ways, and for the auditory learner, for the kinesthetic learner, where does all of that apply when it comes to the majority of the testing that's placed before kids? It doesn't. So we take everything that we have been taught to do, and then when it comes down to the actual testing versus assessment, like you said, because assessments, most time kids do much better in the classrooms on the assessments, but when it comes down to the final hour, the one test that says all be all, they just look at it and be like, I can't do this. They go into it saying, I can't do this. And all the heavy words, the pages are covered with so many words when they already have deficits in reading. They send them up for failure. And like you said, that's what it was designed to do. And I hate that. I hate it.
Yeah, I don't think this is a right turn. I think it's more, I want to dive a little bit deeper into the specific curriculum. And it's funny, I've got like my phone open with a picture that I took when we went to Lorena's session, and I've got like the questions over here. So forgive me if this isn't as clear. So right, y'all just feel comfortable asking clarifying questions. But this is also a moment, right? And I think it's important that people hear about these. Like, this is also a moment of learning for me that happened in an exchange with Lorena and I over email. So I'm gonna read a question, and then and this is what like is so beneficial with being with around smart women, right? That they will lovingly call you in when you need it, right? And like, if you don't have people around you that are willing to do it, you are hanging out with the wrong people. Right? Like, you need to be hanging around with some people that will have some accountability. So one of the questions that we wanted to talk about, that our local district, right, is comprised of 36% Hispanic students, 20% Black, 32% white, 5% multiracial, 4% Asian. And the way I phrased the question was, we are a majority minority district. And so I want to stop there for a second, and I'd like for Lorena to share, like, this is as bad as it gets when somebody calls you in, right? Like, they call you in and you learn from it and you do better and you move on. But I think it's important that these types of things also happen publicly, so that people understand that working and learning to have an anti-bias, anti-racist environment can be done, and it doesn't kill you in the meantime, right? Like, so anyway, Lorena, go ahead and share.
Yeah, no, when I saw that question, I was like, that's a great question. And my only pushback was that phrasing, which let me just say, I hear that a lot. Like, a lot of people are using that phrasing of majority minority. And here's why I think that it's problematic. And I've done reading on it too, just to continue to support how to explain this. And so the issue is that majority minority mathematically doesn't make sense, right? If we're talking about numbers, which is what this question is about, so that's great, then we're not a minority, we are the majority. Because if I read that correctly, now listen, I'm an ELA person, okay? I'm off on math, but it sounds to me like it's 50% plus, right, students of color. Mm-hmm. Right. 36 plus 20 is 56, plus 5 is more than 50. So, about 50% plus. And so what that means is that this is a district that is majority students of color. Because if we say that we are minorities, and that is a term that used to be appropriate, right? Like, that was the term we had as communities in this country. But we're past that because we grew and we changed, and we're not using that word anymore, because that word has, by definition, a concept of less than, right? Somebody that's a minor is because they're younger. And so, and so to be a minority, which I think originally was about numbers, it was to say people who are less in number than this larger group have X struggles. But our struggles are not simply because there's only X many of us. That's not our problem. Because in our communities, we are the majority. In our schools, we are the majority, and we still have the problem. So the problem is not numeric, right? So we have to name it, because this becomes a euphemism. Like now you could say, for example, I work at an urban school, and everybody knows what that means, supposedly, right? Instead of saying I work at a school with predominantly Black kids, all right? Instead of naming it, because that's more comfortable. And so it ends up being this cover language that allows us to cover things up instead of just talking about it. And one of the things that racism is a lie, right? It's a lie. And so we counter lies with truth. And so I stay away more than a 10-foot pole from using words like minority and majority minority, because again, that just confuses what it is that we're talking about, right? And it's inaccurate, mathematically speaking. So that was it. Keep going.
See, that's as bad as it gets, folks. Like that's it. It's as bad as it gets, right? And you learn, and then you do better.
And Angela, to add to that, the first time I heard that word was in the last maybe like 2 years. And every time I heard it, Denise would tell you, I'd be like, that doesn't make any sense to me, because I'm a math teacher. I'm like, what the heck is a majority minority? I said, when I add, just like what she did, when you add the two numbers together, I cannot be the majority and the minority. It doesn't, I could not wrap my head around it. So thank you, Lorena, for making it make sense, because every time I heard it, Denise was like, I'm like, but it doesn't make sense. She was like, yeah, okay.
And then, oh, sorry, Angela. But then I've heard it from a different perspective, saying, well, you're the majority in your neighborhood, your community, whatever, but you're a minority in terms of what you hold power over. So you might be the majority in your neighborhood, but you're the minority on the police department. You're the majority in your neighborhood, but you have the minority in terms of voting rights. Or you're the majority in your community, but you're the minority in terms of, okay, you're not represented in Tallahassee. So I've heard it a variety of ways. So I just want to throw that out there too. But you're right, mathematically, it don't make any sense, because if all together, if all of us are the majority in the school, how could we be a minority unless it's going based upon what one word? Race. That's it.
And let me just add, Angela, I know. But Denise, that's a good point about how this is a conversation about race and power. And so because my field is words, if I'm trying to say that, then I'm simply going to say that. Just say that. Say, yeah, y'all are the majority in Harlem, but y'all ain't got no power in the police force. Like, just say it instead of using minority, which has so many other meanings. I have heard the word minoritized used, which if you're gonna use it, I prefer that, because to say I am a minority is different from I am minoritized, meaning that somebody is acting power on me. Right. So that's a different way of thinking about that. But I don't want to get hung up on all the words. Let's get to the question.
Right. And I will say, Lorena, you talked about that you operate in words. And so I think for me, one of the lessons learned is how easy it is to fall into what you're surrounded by, and you hear that words have power and meaning. Right. And to be our word of the night, to be intentional with that. But so I appreciate that. So now we're getting to the second part of the question, which is going to lead us down a road that I've been waiting to get to with the women that are on here. So thinking about that we are a district that is the majority people of color. And I don't have the graphic here, but I've shared it with all of the women on the panel. And Lorena, I know you've seen it too. It is the graphic about diversity in children's books from 2018. And that at least in 2018, which is the most current of that report, only 10% of children's books published depicted Black characters, while no shock, white characters are depicted 50% of the time. So if I take that reality, that data, and then I go to how we operate in schools, And back to our word, unless you are intentional and you have knowledge, you will, without even maybe meaning to, not be placing text in front of children that represents them. And then I'm also going to go down the road of, it's not just children of color that need to see that, or like that is not unique to them. So what, if anything, can schools do? Schools as the at large, teachers specifically, because all of our schools are made up of humans that are making decisions that make it be a school. What should we be doing to ensure that the majority of all of our students are seeing themselves represented, but also that it is not just that Black and brown students need to see characters that are Black and brown? Our white students need to be reading books with Black and brown major characters. That was roundabout. I'm gonna stop talking.
Wait, what's the question?
So what are specific moves that we can make, knowing that you would have to be intentional, because the majority of books that are published still are centered on white students? Where do we go? What do we do?
If we are, go ahead,
okay. You got to look at who's has control of the money. You know, who's at the very top, who has the purchasing power, and who is looking at the students overall. Okay, so because who's sitting, basically our number one thing that we always say is who's sitting at the table. All right, because if you have you have a group of individuals who are responsible for purchasing a curriculum or purchasing books for the entire population, the Hillsborough County population, but you're realizing, wait a minute, all the books I'm buying, all the books I'm purchasing have nothing to do with, they have to do with a small percentage of the students, versus here's all the students that's represented. Can I have a books that look like the kids that are there? So I look at it, I always look at it from that perspective. Who's doing the buying? Because if you're not, that person or that group is not being intentional, again, about the actual students that are in front of them, and exposure for everyone. You can find great books of all types. I think we actually speaking to your attending your conference, we understand there's books of every kind. You can find a Harry Potter book, but that actually has a Black female character. You can talk about Amari and the Knight brothers. That's the same, almost identical. You could do the same thing with Percy Jackson. You can go and find Tristan Strong. There are books there. But you have to truly, literally sit there and say, hey, all students need to be exposed to a variety of characters. And there's so much that's out there. So, but I just truly believe that it's goes back to purchasing power. Who has the power to purchase the books? That's what I feel.
And then to remember the importance of exposing all children to the true melting pot that the America is made of. There's no one race that should be deemed most powerful at our current time. It just should not exist. And it's so amazing that our children, non-Black children, will, in most cases, say to the fact that this isn't right. Why is this still happening? They will ask those challenging questions when given an opportunity, and they have been taught to use their voice in an allyship tone. And they too are baffled as to why we are still here. And, even in the books, because books that we're not going to be able to read anymore based upon anyway, they will say, oh, such and such was racist. Why that character did this, and why they will bring voice to that. And at that moment, when they bring voice to that, we are in a position now to where the adults are once again having so much to say, versus allowing the teacher to facilitate, the children to use their overall, what they have been taught, their beliefs, and then cipher out what they know is to be in their hearts, what's good and bad. Because our children could do that. They know the difference. And I just feel that at this point, put some children on the doggone textbook committee. Hell, let them talk about what they want to learn. Let them tell you what characters they want to see in the books. Because I can recall on many, many years ago when FCAT was in existence, that we used to talk about Su Lin and over in China so much, in Hawaii. And I'm like, these children don't know nothing but tornadoes and hurricanes, beaches, and why are we talking about Su Lin in China? So there was never no connection as to what, like by the time they try to figure out what was that one word, tsunami. It had something to do with a tsunami. Once they were so caught up on the spelling of the word and then trying to figure out what it even mean. By the time they try to pull all the text together, I would be confused about answering the question too, because I didn't know what no tsunami was. But again, until we start to be more intentional about putting the individuals in the space at the tables that bring a diverse lens, then we're never going to reach a place to where our children are going to receive the text, the curriculum, educators that are willing to bring their creativity into the classroom and utilize those tools, because that's all they are, and learn to teach the standards. If we stripped away all this curriculum and all these, you do this and every teacher doing that in the classroom at the same time, and just stick to teaching to the standards, I think we'll do much more. Our kids will have a better advantage in this overall academic world. And when I say our children, at that point, I mean that all children will advance at a better rate, at a faster rate.
Obviously there's so much that I want to say, but I think that for a very, very long time, for all of the duration of education in this country, the focus of education in this country has been to uplift and to unearth the genius of white men in particular, right? That's how it started. And so do they need to feel like geniuses too? Yes, absolutely. But when we have done that at the expense of everybody else's genius, right? Because I'm thinking about the theme here of this panel of cultivating genius and of your whole series of Black excellence, right? Like, how are we supposed to do that if we are not portraying that excellence through books? For example, and we can do that in every subject area, but the question is about books. And so if young people, Black, brown, indigenous, like everybody, Asian, Latinos, everybody, right? If everybody cannot see stories where they see themselves, their mothers, their uncles, their grandpas, their cousins in nuanced and complicated ways, just like white kids do, because they get to see white superheroes, white villains, white grandmas, white grandkids, white people making mistakes, white people succeeding, right? We get to not see that. If we see ourselves, it is often through tropes and stereotypes and the same stories, right? And so how can schools actually unearth that genius without nurturing it through books? And how are we going to celebrate that excellence without exposing it through books? And so I think that's really, that's how, what
That was so good what you just said.
I hope somebody wrote it down, because I'm tired and I already forgot what I said. But but the truth is that we can't continue, and that's part of the problem with these bills, with all of this legislation, is that you're claiming that what you want is skills. You're claiming that just teach the content. Like, how dare you think that that's not what we're trying to do? Right? How dare you think that me saying the truth about this is not actually going to prepare your child for critical thinking conversations when they get to college? Because your kids too, your white ones too, are stuck when they're sitting there and don't know how to discuss something. That's why they're turning to their little enclaves so that they can be shielded and protected by racism, because that's the only thing they find that they can turn to. Because if all else fails, I can't discuss like you, I can't talk about this like you, I can't run the game like you, well, at least I'm better than you because I'm white, right? Like, that's what racism is in the end. And so they're going to continue to turn to that. That's going to continue to be their haven if we don't create academic spaces where everybody can actually learn and we can cultivate their genius, everybody's genius, right? And so that Black excellence and cultivating genius in classrooms is a benefit for all. When you address the most marginalized, everybody is taken care of,
Yeah, Lorena, one of the things that I was, that I pulled up on my phone, and I had shared this with you, that I was so grateful having attended your session the night before. I was involved with a bias training, right? That you provided the words for me to remind several people. And forgive me, I'm going to paraphrase. And if you want to fix it after I get finished, you can fix it. But you said, what message does it send children when they rarely see themselves in our curriculum? What we choose to put in front of kids shows what we value. And if some students don't see themselves in those choices, and I added this because it fit the moment I was in, it's hard to feel confident if I don't feel valued or represented or even see myself at all. Right. So it's that.
Why should I care about this curriculum if this curriculum doesn't care about me? Correct.
Right. And we can, we can go down the road of, oh, but I believe in children. I believe in the children I serve. If the actions don't match that, how do you believe in something that you never think to put in front of children? I like that. That just doesn't seem like it fits. So I can't believe we have 2 minutes. It's like we have 2 minutes. So I want to end this part about, and I'm, grateful for you to bring it back around to the purpose about, cultivating genius, acknowledging the genius, recognizing it, and coming back to what are your final thoughts on this? If, thinking about the people that are watching, what do you want them to leave with and resonate, percolate? If one thing sticks with them, what is that thing you want them to remember and possibly advocate for?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a parent and you're listening, then know your power and your agency and use it, not just for your own children, but for the others, right? Like if you know that there are problems happening at your school that are disproportionately against Black students, but you're white and your kid is white and doesn't affect them, we're not to April's point earlier, that doesn't matter. If it affects that kid, it affects your kid. And so you advocate and you step in. That's what co-conspirators do. So yeah.
Okay, I guess I'll go. All right. Speak up and speak out. Continue to push for it. I mean, just like I agree with Lorena, you have power. Parents have power, but also teachers have power. You need to also speak. If you see that something is not right, you feel that this doesn't work for your curriculum, this doesn't work for your classroom. You have the right to change it. We are quick thinkers. Every time, like something that worked for a period might not work with a 7th period class. We can change those things on the fly. But the same thing, if you see this is not working, just speak up. Continue. Do not be afraid. You know that truth hurts and truth is an offense, but truth also wakes and shakes people up. So it's going to be all right. That's what I say. Just as loud as people want to say, oh, I don't want to agree with what you're teaching, just as loud as you can say, hey, this is what needs to be taught. And that's the case right there. That's my 2 cents.
And I would say that, like Lorena said, that if children do not see us bringing forth, being intentional about what's impacting them negatively, then how do we expect them to even respect the whole process itself? Meaning, I'm coming to a school, I know that I'm being suspended, or my peers that look like me are being suspended at a higher rate than anyone else on this campus, and my punishment is always more harsh than others. And I know that it exists for my cousin, and my uncle could tell me that it happened to him. Like, that continuous cycle lets them know that at this point something should have changed. So if we don't speak power to that, and that speaking to power to that means that action comes behind it, then we cannot expect our children to really shift the behavior to a place to where it's acceptable in other people's eyes, because some of that stuff they doing not really that bad, but some of it is extreme, but we know that. So we have to be intentional about that. And in order to cultivate the genius in any child, we have to first see the child. We have to see the child for who they are, what they bring to the environment. And then if it's something that you want to see indifferent in that child, mold it into something different, meaning that different is positive. Not trying to change their belief systems, but we're just talking about what's going to be considered academically appropriate so that they can be successful at school and in their communities.
Ladies, like, I'm almost like it. Thank you always seems like such an understatement, right? Like, I have been taking copious note, right? That's what I've been doing while y'all have been talking. So, as always, I want to say thank you to April and Denise, and I want to remind everybody Yay, Ellen. That makes me happy. You learned that makes me happy to see that. April and Denise, I wanted to thank you. And I also want to quick reminder, you can always visit sunshineeducationcoalition.org to learn more, not just about kind of what we're trying to do, but join the work for sure. And I also wanted to bring up, and Lorena, I was going to mention the multiculturalclassroom.org. If you want to go, she has many. So
.com.
Oh, .com. Okay. .com. .com. So if you're like me, you're going to eat it. Definitely follow. She's a good follow on Twitter, right? Like I am a Twitter person for sure. She's a good follow on Twitter. So I just want to thank everybody out there for participating and sticking around with us to learn. And we are looking forward to next week with everybody. And I'm looking at my colleagues and saying, because our topic next week is
nurturing greatness, and we have some phenomenal clinicians that's going to be on there to identify what is the true impact for our children that are going through trauma in the learning environment and connecting that to community or vice versa. So we are super excited to have both of them, and we're not going to tell y'all who they are. The flyer will be out most likely on tomorrow, but that makes you all go look for the information. We always tell y'all everything y'all want to look. So again, it's very, very important that you all share this information out. If this information is only as good as when we come together, talk about it. But if you don't let other people know about it, it's just here. Like many of our books are just on a show.
Exactly. Pick an action and take it, right? Pick an action and take it tomorrow. So yeah, y'all have a good night. And ladies, thank you as always for the learning experience.
Good night, everyone.